Welcome to Handmade History. Hello, welcome to Handmade History. I'm Alicia.
And I'm Sonia.
And we are back from our winter break, and we're really excited to be recording again. So, Sonia, I thought we would kick things off with our favorite crafty holiday present. It could be something you gave or something you got. Do you have one?
I got some homemade coffee syrups.
Ooh, that is a good one.
And I love syrups to put in them. So,
what were the flavors?
Like a caramel and then like a sugar cookie, almond sugar.
Well, that was a really good one. I got a knitting book called Echoes by Susan Crawford, who's a knitting designer, and it's all knitting patterns that are based on historical women, and some of them are real, and some of them are fictional. Like there's a pair of little like fingerless gloves called Marple for Miss Marple.
Oh,
so I think I'm gonna make those. But it's also just a beautiful book. I love it.
That sounds awesome.
Now let's go on to the show. Today we are going to be talking about the history of lace.
Yes, this is our very first episode that was suggested by a listener. So Emily sent us the idea of doing lace, along with a photo of the lace collection at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And we'll post that on our Instagram story. So thank you, Emily, for the suggestion.
Yes, thank you, Emily. Lace is a huge topic. There is lace everywhere. It's like tie-dye or nail binding, only there's a lot more information on it because Victorians were really obsessed with it, which we'll talk about later. So this is a very brief introduction, and I hope we'll go down some rabbit holes in future episodes.
So let's get into the origins of the word. It's a French word, and the earliest use, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, is in 1230 from a work called the Encrine Rule. The Encrine Rule, also known as the Encrine Wis, is a book of rules for anchoresses or nuns. And anchoresses lived in the walls of churches. They were like public hermits. And also early uses of the word lace could mean ties, as in shoelaces.
Yes. So the lace that we are talking about is the decorative lace. So a definition from Merriam-Webster is an ornamental braid for trimming coat for uniforms, or an open work, usually figured fabric made of thread or yarn and used for trimmings, household coverings, and entire garments. So if you picture lace in your home, it's probably white, made out of thread, and maybe it decorates like a tablecloth. It's very intricate and pretty. It's ornate. Or curtains, you can find it on also very commonly lingerie. And I had it on my wedding dress. The whole thing was covered in lace. So that's maybe the most lace I've ever had.
Yeah, it is all lace. So there's a lot of different ways to make it. You can use a needle, you can do bobbins and weaving techniques, and you can also crochet it. And there are also knitting patterns for lace. So we typically think of lace as white, but it was often made out of black thread and also gold and silver. But examples like these do not survive nearly as often as the white lace because the black lace would dissolve because of an acidic ingredient used to fix the dye, and metal laces were often melted down. It is unique in that it is completely useless. By definition, it has no substance. Thomas Fuller, an English writer, said, "It is a superfluous wearing because it doth neither hide nor heat." And as we will see, it is an economic force that has driven international regulation and domestic policy.
Yeah. So some places that are associated with lace include Belgium, especially Flanders and Brussels, Spain, France, Italy, and England. But as a Mrs. Palliser wrote in an article in a magazine called The Decorator and the Furnisher in 1890, the same laces have been made in almost every country in Europe. And we would say that lace has been made in almost every country, period. Lace was made and spread by the Portuguese and the Dutch. It was made in Switzerland, the source of the earliest lace pattern book, which we will talk about. It has traditions in India, Singapore, and Sri Lanka. Lace was also made in Latin America by different indigenous groups in pre-Columbian times. Basically, if you search lace in any country or region in the world, you can find an interesting tradition there. And Helen Anderson wrote in another issue of that same magazine in 1890, "We cannot go back to the time when mention of lace is not made in some form or other." So I think this is really remarkable because lace is incredibly time consuming to make and so useless. So I find it really interesting, and I love that this is a part of the human tradition. All right, so to try and keep this kind of organized, we're going to go chronologically, country by country, as best we can. And this is not comprehensive. It is merely an introduction to some of the famous and interesting traditions that have been researched. Sonia,
Let's go.
go ahead.
All right. So starting off before the 1500s, lace was made by various people in Latin America as early as the 1000s CE. Chancay people in the Andes along the west coast of South America made lace that is called Chancay gauze. It looks like filet crochet. It includes images and it can also be beautiful abstract patterns. This was done before the Inca took over. The Inca ruled South America when the conquistadors came. It was made using very tightly wound single-ply yarn. Sometimes the yarn varied in how tightly it was wound to make different effects on the finished product. And the yarns were held taut on a loom and then released.
And it's still done today. I watched a video of a person doing it just a few years ago, and he didn't learn it from his family, but was self-taught. And he said he liked it because it was a good challenge. It was different and more difficult. So I thought that was interesting. Later, when the Spaniards arrived in the 1400s and the 1500s, they brought needle and bobbin lace, and the two traditions and other traditions that already existed in Latin America intermixed. So another fabric that was made at this time was an Incan textile called the cumbi, which was a very fine woven fabric. And it's woven so that both sides look really beautiful. And this is not lace, but interestingly, the tradition of the cumbi absorbed the influences of the Spanish colonizers. And I actually saw a cumbi that had a pattern woven into it that looked like lace. I thought that was really cool.
Since we mentioned the conquistadors and Spanish lace, let's talk about lace and Spain. So, two types of lace that became popular in Spain were called blonde and chantilly lace, and they lasted in popularity long after they stopped being popular in the rest of Europe. So, one quick story that is mostly not factual, but it is fun. There is a legend that Catherine of Aragon, who married King Henry VIII in 1509, brought lace making to England. It's probably not true, but the story is that the lace makers were out of work, so Catherine burned all of her lace and ordered new lace from the lace makers. And November 25th was celebrated as Patterns Day, holiday for lace makers.
Yes, I love that story. I love the idea of jumpstarting your local economy by just destroying everything you own and making people make new versions of it.
I think if you're a queen, though, you buy enough lace to do that.
Yeah. So a lot of the European lace came from Italy, and Venice and Florence especially were both lace-making hotbeds. A lot of the lace in Italy was made for ecclesiastical or church garments, and originally it might have been made by nuns. There are many theories of how lace was invented, but one is that it began as embroidered cut work, which is when you embroider a design and then cut away the extra fabric in between. And other methods of doing cut work can start with a, quote, web of threads, and then you make the design on them. In the 1500s, pattern books were printed in Italy for lace, and a famous one was made by Frederick Vinciolo from Venice. However, the earliest lace pattern book we have was actually printed in Zurich, Switzerland, and it is based on Italian designs. So this was super fun. I actually found a copy of it online. It's called The New Model Book by R.M., probably a woman. In English, that's The New Pattern Book. But the full title is New Pattern Book of All Kinds of Bobbin Laces Currently Popular in Upper Germany, created for teaching female students and all other lace ribbon workers in Zurich and elsewhere, prepared for the first time from original works by R.M. Just rolls off the tongue. It was published in 1561, and the copy that I found was a translation by Helen Huff, which she made in 2018. And she used for her translation a copy made by Claire Burkhard for a museum in Basel. And the book contains 164 patterns. It's about 50 illustrated pages, and it has an alphabetic index of the patterns, which wasn't common at the time, but is very helpful. And the reason that I thought it was so cool to read this online is that only 5 of these books currently still exist worldwide. And one actually was sold in October of 2018 for $38,000. So this book is incredibly rare, but if you Google it, you can read it yourself.
Check it out.
Yeah.
So RM wrote that she was a teacher of lace making and gave a brief history of lace in the introduction, saying lace came to Switzerland in 1536 from Venice and, quote, other parts of Italy. Quote, sensible women and girls wanted to learn how to make it, and they made a collective. They united to make and market the lace, agreeing to share everything in proportion to work each person did. And another quote is that lace is in great demand and workshops have grown up in many places and will likely continue to do so. So this used Italian designs, and they also made their own, and noted that the heavier or finer threads could be used to make designs look different, and you could make lace with flax, silk, and metallic threads. RM published this herself by hiring a Christoph Froschauer, a Zurich printer who has, quote, a special understanding of art and textile design. And like you mentioned, you can still use it.
Yeah, you can still use those patterns. So the 1500s and the 1600s were a pinnacle for lace making in Europe. At this time, lace was worn by men and women. Lace was especially used in ruffs, which took a lot of lace. Lord Dorset, the husband of Lady Anne Clifford of England, a famous baroness, mentioned the, quote, green and black silk lace on his coach in his will in 1624. And Samuel Pepys, who is famous for keeping a diary in the 1600s, wrote on August 12th in 1664 that he went to Stevens the silversmith to change some old silver lace and then went to buy new silk lace for a petticoat.
Lace also showed political and social status. There's a great story from The Golden Thread, which is a book by Cassia St. Clair. Quote, when in 1577, King Henry III of France sought to intimidate the Estates General, an assembly of groups of his subjects, he turned up to a meeting wearing 4,000 yards of gold lace.
So much lace.
A power move. Queen Elizabeth wore a ton of lace. She bought most of it from Alice Montaigne, a silk and linen dealer. And in a famous portrait of Queen Elizabeth by Nicholas Hilliard, Hilliard actually thickened the paint he used to make the lace and was actually dimensional, as in it sticks up. In 1576, she bought 27 pounds of lace, and she spent 9,535 pounds on clothing over the last 4 years of her reign. But there's more. The next monarch of England was King James, and he spent 36,777 pounds in his very first year on lace. And he bought over 1,100 pounds of lace.
Yes. So
that is so much lace.
It's so much lace. However, lace wasn't just for the upper classes. There's a bed cover from 1588 that survives that has an image of a siren combing her hair, and it includes the words made in the lace. Virtue isn't everything. It's another power move.
I love that.
It probably belonged to a courtesan. So, moving on to lace, foreign lace in other lands. So, it's hard to categorize this because foreign lace caused problems in multiple countries.
Oh.
So, we're not just talking about England here. But we'll start in England. Venetian lace was super popular in England. Under Queen Elizabeth I, no one less than the rank of gentleman could wear foreign lace while attending the Queen. In France, King Louis XIV, the Sun King, also imported a ton of Venetian lace. In the boats that rode around the canals of Versailles, the windows had Venetian lace curtains. And this actually led to an international incident.
So Jean-Baptiste Colbert, the Minister of Finance and Trade, wanted the Sun King to spend his money on the French people. But the type of lace that Louis XIV loved was called Mantevenise. and Colbert spearheaded the creation of Point de France. And in 1665, he set up factories. He worked with the French ambassador in Venice to steal trade secrets, like how much different types of lace cost and how much lace makers could be expected to produce. And many of these letters were in code. He asked royal designers and painters to make new designs for Point de France, and he invited lace makers from Italy and Flanders and Belgium to immigrate to France and offered them citizenship. Italy retaliated, decreeing that no lace makers should leave, and those that had should come back and be executed for treason. Wow.
Yes. So this is an example of the kinds of foreign and domestic policy that lace drove in Europe at this time.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing. At the same time, lace was made by many people. As Mrs. Palliser wrote in that article that we mentioned before, much that is delicate and charming in design has been the work, not the pretty pastime of the poor. So all this lace that the rich were buying was often made by people in the lower classes. And in Ghent, Belgium, in 1589, a law was passed against servants quitting to become lace makers. And in 1649, a similar law was passed in Toulouse, France. So lace making must have been more profitable or better working conditions than being a servant in those places in those times, which is kind of interesting.
So from Europe, colonizers also spread lace to other parts of the world. In Goa, India, lace was brought by Portuguese nuns who established the Santa Monica Church Convent in 1606. They made lace with a hooked needle, which could be crochet or needle lace, and it was worn in regular and ceremonial clothes. And from Goa, it's spread to other places in India and Malacca, which is a city in Malaysia.
Machine lace was invented in France in 1820. However, the handmade lace tradition continued. For example, in Belgium, a type of lace called Point de Gauze debuted at the 1851 Crystal Palace exhibition in London. And this lace was, quote, one of the last of the great entirely handmade laces developed and offered commercially. However, in that article by Mrs. Palliser that was written in 1890 for the Decorating magazine, she mentioned a lace that was made in Brussels at that time that used very fine flax thread, which could cost $1,200 per pound, which would be more than $40,000 today, and that was spun underground because air could damage it. And she also mentioned lace made in Ypres, which would cost $400 a yard, or almost $14,000 today, and took a lace maker working 12 hours a day to make 1/3 of an inch each week, and which used 1,200 bobbins. And she wrote that in almost every other branch of art or commerce, the introduction of machinery has immediately reduced the value of the handmade article. But with lace, the effect has been very different. It has rather increased the value of real lace, although much of the machine-made lace is very beautiful and very wonderful in its delicacy. It has not as yet attained the exquisite softness and richness of handmade lace. So even though machine-made lace was being made, it still was very much a handmade world, even in the late 1800s.
So Victorians and lace. At the same time, in the late 1800s, Isabella Stewart Gardner was assembling her collection. Other Victorians were interested in lace, like Mrs. Palliser and Helen Anderson, who wrote articles about it. And Mrs. Palliser also wrote an entire book on the history of lace. And from the Gardner Museum website, quote, Gardner's lace collection is distinguished by its sheer variety both in technique and provenance. So it comes from France, Belgium, Spain, and Italy. She traveled to these places and also shopped in New York, where lace was imported. And there's over 177 examples. But most are not shown because of the sensitivity to light. Quote, although the majority of early 20th century American museums collected lace, Isabella was unique in her ability to select the most exquisite pieces. Her unusual knowledge of fine lace made her museum a haven for lovers of textiles.
So my hypothesis is that the Victorians were worried about losing the handmade examples of lace because machines were starting to make lace and getting maybe better and improved technology was making finer lace.
Yeah, because they're kind of the turning point, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting question. I'm not sure you could ever answer it, but it's interesting to think about because I feel like Victorians are very much associated with lace in my mind.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. Like black lace. That's what I think.
Black lace, yes, and black clothing, yes. But anyway, any other thoughts on lace? You've actually made lace, haven't you, Sonia?
Yeah, I love lace.
And what kind of lace do you do? Bobbin lace, needle lace?
I did tatted lace, which uses a shuttle. It makes very loopy designs.
Oh, cool.
And then I've also done crochet lace because I have very small crochet neat hooks.
You gave me some crochet lace on it. A picture frame.
Oh, yeah. I did try bobbin lace.
Very cool. So yeah, that's lace. Thanks so much for listening. Before we go, I wanted to share a project related to the wildfires in LA. If you are a quilter and you'd like to send a quilt to a family in LA who has lost their home, San Diego Sewn is collecting them for a project called Wrap LA in Love. And we'll include a link in the show notes, or you can search up San Diego Sewn, which is a quilting shop. And any quilt, lap size or larger, is welcome, and they can also be gently used. Well, if you would like to email us, we would love to hear about lace that you have made, or if you have an idea or a suggestion for us for a future show. You can email us at handmadehistoryhosts, that's HOSTS, @gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram at Handmade History Podcast. And now you can find us on Blue Sky. We are at Handmade History Pod because Handmade History Podcast was too long. And we're also on Tumblr as Handmade History Podcast. So thank you so much for listening.
Thanks. Bye.
I am going to cut this part out. All right.